Morning, June 27th, County Cannabis Working Group meeting. It's 10:08, and we have a few people missing today. I'm filling in for Blake Alexander, who's chair. He's not here today, and Eric Gunther is not here today. All right, and the sheriff's not here today. So today on our agenda, we're going to continue our discussion on manufacturing and processing, and a little bit of discussion on cultivation, commercial cultivation. At our last meeting, we talked about some details around manufacturing and processing, talked about definitions, different kinds of manufacturing. We talked about scale and zoning, things like that. And we had a little discussion on cultivation. We talked about scale and zoning, residential setbacks, and had a little discussion on water and water usage and things like that. All right, so if anybody wants to kick it off, if there's any public comment that wants to start, that's okay. All right, I'll start it off if nobody else has anything else to say. So if we want to just pick up back on manufacturing, we went over some definitions. I see my box of information just came in. I can get my books out.
Did we not decide that we were going to eliminate volatiles entirely?
I think so, yes. Yeah. Let me get over to my information here. So yeah, we talked about not including the volatile manufacturing category as defined by the state using volatile solvents, fuel-based solvents. In the non-volatile category, there is CO2 extraction, which could be considered it can be dangerous if it's not done right. There's OSHA considerations, there's engineered equipment requirements, so it's definitely more intense than other kinds of non-volatile manufacturing. So we talked about having some kind of definition or designation within the county so that those operations, may be zoned differently or have different considerations.
Jesse, aren't those already have different rules because of the flammables or the fire and the safety and that kind of stuff? They have different.
Yeah, they have different, I think there's more requirements, there's more involvement with perhaps the fire department, OSHA standards and things like that. But as far as where they are located, I think the state doesn't speak to that, and that would be up to the county where they're located and perhaps the scale of it if we wanted to get into influencing that.
Heidi, in the zoning ordinances, do they say anything about scale and type of manufacturing as far as how you designate a particular building for a particular zone?
No, we have some Florida area ratios in our general plan for commercial development, but we don't really have anything else that specifically speaks to, size and scale of, limitations on structures. Obviously depending on whatever the use is and the location, there's other factors that we have to take into consideration, parking if it's required, on-site sewage disposal wells, those if they're not within the public services, served by public services. I don't know if, does that answer your question? Okay.
And so on that first item is also included processing. It can be considered similar in some instances, but generally less intensive, but probably similar zoning to most of the types of non-volatile extractions other than ethanol extractions and CO2 extractions. Yeah, those are kind of all the thoughts I have on that right now.
You know, it's been my opinion that I'd like to see us not limit the scale per se, you know, in case, you know, we had an opportunity to develop you know, an economy for a wage earner. But I'm not sure where we were at with the scale there. I think we're stepping away from sizing, or
What do you think, Joel?
I don't want to get into regulating the size of building a floor space, and I don't think it's really necessary. I think the market is going to control size, and if it gets really big, great, it's jobs.
Great, I agree with that.
As far as CO2 and ethanol, we had talked about an extra finding by the Planning Commission. I'm tinkering with what that language will look like. But it was kind of my feeling before that we were pretty done with manufacturing.
Pretty close,
You
yeah.
know,
Perfect. Unless there's some talk of C2, C3, the places where we have retail, potentially allowing manufacturing other than CO2 and ethanol. And perhaps the CO2 and ethanol operations would only be in a C4 or manufacturing. I think there was some talk of that. I don't know if there was a decision or not. But I don't know, what do you guys think?
I recall that there was some public concern about the hours of operation and whether or not there was going to be a lot of noise or traffic in and out. And I think we need to think about those concerns.
Right, Eric talked about that, operations running 24 hours a day. In a manufacturing zone, I can see that being perfectly appropriate to make use of a capital investment. But maybe in other areas it might not be. I don't know. It might be a difficult nuance, or just keep those kinds of things in the manufacturing C4 zones in order to limit that. Retail already has hours of operation limits set by the state. So if you're going to not have that for manufacturing, maybe it should be in the more intensive zones.
so basically, as far as zoning, we're just gonna maybe say, maybe put hours of operation on something that would be a less permissive zoning, something closer into residentials would have hours of operations on it, but something more explicitly designated for that type of use would not.
Maybe just the same as the restrictions that are already set for retail. What do you think, Joel, if they applied the same hour of operation restrictions that are on retail to manufacturing that's in zones where retail is allowed, you know, other than manufacturing zones? Does that make sense?
I don't know.
May I
sounds-
speak to that a little
Yeah,
bit? I
please.
mean, unless the retail requires some type of use permit, we generally don't have regulations as far as the hours of operation. If it requires a use permit, which is obviously discretionary, then, you know, the hours of operation can vary depending on the use and depending upon the neighborhood.
Okay.
So there's no real canned set
Okay.
of hours, and then also days of operation, you know, Sundays, holidays, et cetera. So
Okay.
it's sort of on a case by case basis.
That sounds good.
Doesn't retail, I can't remember now, everything's getting kind of blurry on that, but the state has hours of operation mandated for these retail
Correct,
operations,
yeah.
right? But the state doesn't have mandated hours of operations for manufacturing, and so the conversation moves to, if you're letting manufacturing happening in the same zones as retail, should the hours of operation be the same? And can we impose hours of operation on manufacturing in a C zone versus a different zone? Right? Is that kind of what we're getting to?
I think we probably can, but what is the harm we're trying to mitigate? What is the harm of a manufacturing use going on in the middle of the night in a C2, for instance? Is it noise? It's not noise, right? It's not
Yeah, not
traffic.
noise. I suppose it would just be business traffic in a place that, I'm not familiar really with the layout of the C2 and how it's adjacent to residential zones. I mean, we have manufacturing zones that are pretty close to residential too, so I'm not really sure, but it would be traffic. It wouldn't be noise. There could be traffic, just like any business that's running in the nighttime. So. But like Heidi said, I think if it's on a case-by-case basis, dependent on where it is, its proximity to neighborhoods and stuff, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'd rather leave it alone completely and let that be conditions on a use permit as needed.
Perfect.
We discussed setbacks as well in residential areas, based on some people's public comment, and I think we need to address that, whether there are setbacks when you have manufacturing in residential zones, because there was a lot of talk about the odor and problems with the odor of growing. There were concerns about the traffic, if I recall correctly, going in and out of the residential areas. And so there was a discussion about setbacks, but also about the traffic.
Certainly. Yeah, with manufacturing, there shouldn't be odor, and that wouldn't include cultivation. If there's odors coming from manufacturing facility, I think there's some other kind of problem. I think you can't spew out offensive odors kind of no matter what, I think, but I'm not sure how that works. I mean, you could generate odors if you weren't filtering correctly or whatever. You could definitely exhaust smelly air. Please come to the mic so that everybody on the recording can hear you. I'm sorry to make you. Thank you. And I'm supposed to make you say your name too.
My name is Carol.
Okay.
And at what point can the public have an input on this? Because this is open to the public? this
Yes, at any point. Yeah, sorry for not making that clear. I'm not a professional meeting holder. So yeah, anytime you want. Yeah,
meeting? I'm a
please.
little bit unclear also. Are these representatives of the manufacturers?
No.
No, we're appointed public members of the Cannabis Working Committee
Okay.
as appointed by the Board of Supervisors.
Okay. I have a couple of issues, one of which is I live in a residential area, and there has a huge growing operation, commercial operation has been constructed. And so consequently, what's happened in the last, I guess, 3 months is the neighbor's well has gone dry. He's lived there for 40 years. It's completely dry. We have had a terrible infestation of rats. So we've had to call in pest control. Everything has been photographed and documented. He has taken pictures of the debris, the trash, and so there's a terrible stench so that the neighbors have to close their windows and their doors because there's not a proper filtration system. I guess it's the carbon filtration system in order. And so those are the obvious concerns. The biggest concern is the possibility of the water being contaminated because of uncertainty of uses of pesticides and chemicals with this operation. So the zoning is the critical issue, and I'm wondering what is being done about that. A huge commercial operation in a residential area where it's already disturbing the neighbors. So what is being...
That existing operation that you're speaking of is completely ungoverned by the laws that we're talking about right now.
Meaning that they're not permitted, they're not...
There is no such thing as a permit at this point. That's happening under previous rules from the state of California, which is one of the reasons why no one can rein it in. And so this is talking about the implementation of these new rules from the state of California, which will give the county the ability to either prevent or mitigate most of the problems that you're talking about. And so I don't know where this place is you're speaking of. Sounds to me, just in the quick context of your discussion, that this would be a zone that wouldn't be allowed under the new county regulations that we're speaking about.
Okay, so this was...
But I have no clue other than just
Okay.
guessing.
Yeah, so in the new county regulations will be effective in 2019, is that correct?
They could, currently, right now, there's a ban. In 2019, if that ban is not allowed, any and all cannabis production is illegal. if the county adopts a new rule before 2019, then whatever that regulation is will become the law, and these operations will have to acquire licenses and
Right.
inspections and all of these things. But right now, what's happening there is, for the most part, unregulated.
So what influences the county's decision?
So, just to be clear, we're public members appointed by the Board of Supervisors. We're just members of the public, and then we have staff here, county staff. And so we're just sort of like an advisory body. We just have these open discussions
Right.
and then give these, I guess, just advice to the Board of Supervisors. County council writes recommendations. County council generates the ordinance language, and then the Board of Supervisors makes the decisions. And then especially with current problems that are going on now, that's an issue to take directly to the Board of Supervisors and to
Chair,
community.
I know the issue that you're
Okay.
speaking of, and they are working with our code enforcement.
Okay, great.
We're very aware of the situation. But I'd just
Super.
like you to know, all the conversations of this group to date related to cultivation of cannabis have been to keep it out of residential zones, whether it's for medical use or recreational use. So I think what we have right now is someone who's operating under the collective model, which will expire at the last day of this year. And then there will be no opportunity for them to be able to do what they're doing beyond that date. I know that there are some existing issues that we're trying to deal with as they come up related to the particular issue in your neighborhood.
Right, and I have spoken to the supervisor already, and he's
yeah.
working with me on this, so. but
And they're in
he's-
contact with our office as well, so.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you very much. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Thank you. Any other comment on that, or any other public comment? Morning.
Good morning. My name is Alicia McCulloch, and I live in 180 Church Tree Road, and I'm sorry for my accent.
No,
But
thank you.
anyway, I would appreciate if you guys don't keep anything growing in our neighborhood, because it's so sad to see all these little ones around it. And I'm a little nervous.
It's okay.
But please don't do that. Keep it more in the outside, where they can work much better, and the community will be more happy, and the kids will be healthy, and the communities will be more healthy. Thank you.
Thank you, I agree.
My name is Levon Sparks,
Morning.
and I live on Angel Lane behind Bipon, and as of this morning, he has 60 plants planted next to my fence line. My fiance runs a motorcycle shop. Last year, the smell was horrible. And it was a big commercial grow, and then somebody came in, the police or somebody, and made him get rid of the grow. He is now planting more inside of a big plastic container. Is this legal?
I'm not the one to answer that. I'm just a public citizen.
Okay.
That'd be a question for law enforcement. and
We've talked to
county
Eric,
council.
we've
Yeah.
talked to Jerry, our supervisor,
Uh-huh.
and nobody's really doing anything. My fiance is taking pictures as he goes along with his grow.
Mm-hmm.
He has his 10-year-old son out planting pot.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't turn it in because when I went to take a picture of this young man, he covered him up with plastic. To me, there's a lot of illegal things going on in residential area, and it's really difficult. We lost our water 6 weeks last year. They say you can't prove that we lost it. He's had the property for 40 years, never lost his water. We had just 2 years before, he had bought the, 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 2 years before, he had bou I can't think of the word now, whatever, you pump the water out of the well. We are all on wells on Vipon and all around. And there's a lot of grows in garages above us and around that people hide. So anyway, I kind of want to know what's going on. What do we do? You know, we've done everything we can. We've talked to Dominic, we have pictures and everything. So it's like, I don't like this. I go in the back and our people want to, we have 3.5 acres, our people want to go in the back and they see this horrible mess that looks like Cave Junction, plastic thrown all over. And it's a disgrace to the neighborhood, it really is. And I just wanted to tell you guys how I feel about this. And Gary feels the same way, especially having a business right there. And so I don't know what you all are going to do, but keep it out of the residential area. That's the main thing to me and around the children. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So I think we've heard several comments just now, and I think all the comments, what they have in common are you're dealing with essentially these unregulated grows. We're in a gray year right now where the rules that have been implemented by the vote on Prop 64 can't take place yet for the most part. And so you're dealing with things that have been happening not necessarily in your exact location, but for years, based upon the inability of law enforcement to enforce rules on these grows, let's say. But the implementation of Prop 64 and all of these rules that we're discussing put a fine line and will be able to put an end to some of these specific things that you're complaining about, you know, commercial grows in residential areas. In 2019, these rules that we're trying to put in place would absolutely make that an illegal situation. It would be without permits, all of these things. And so I don't know specifically exactly all the details of what of all these discussions here, but it sounded to me like everything you're talking about is probably outside the realm of what we're trying to implement. And once 2019 rolls around and these regulations get put in place and it becomes more of a definite line that this stuff will get reined in and it will help tremendously. Because right now there's really no ability for the sheriff or anybody else to really exactly put a stop to it. There's so many ins and outs and ways out for people doing that. So.
And just for your guys' knowledge, we appreciate your feedback, and we can't say that we have the problems that you've been having, but we're trying to alleviate those problems by getting the options to the Board of Supervisors to vote correctly to impose these regulations that he's talking about so that they can be legally stopped. Right now, it's kind of an open market out there, and this year is a real weird year. And so if we can do our job up here and using your guys' feedback, then hopefully the supervisors will go and make an ordinance, and then it can be stopped in 19 the way it's going right now.
Yeah, please. Sorry. We need a portable microphone around.
I am going to be writing a petition and getting signatures, and I'm wondering, who do I give this petition to? Who would I deliver this to?
I would say the Board of Supervisors, the clerk of the Board of Supervisors.
Pardon?
The clerk of the Board of Supervisors.
Okay.
They're located upstairs.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can you tell us about your petition, and we can
This point
hear
in
about
time,
it?
no.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the work of this group and the county is specifically to address these kinds of issues. It gives the county and the sheriff the tools to be able to address these issues. And all the consensus, we haven't gotten into the cultivation discussion very much. In the last meeting, we kind of just started the discussion on it. But the general consensus that I've heard, I think everyone would agree, it's fair to say that there isn't any inclination to allow or permit commercial cultivation anywhere near residential zones. And I think that's a model that's been proven in other places, like you mentioned Oregon, where they didn't do it right, and they didn't give the local jurisdictions enough control to be able to mitigate those problems. Some of the first counties in California made the same mistake. I think Calaveras County comes to mind, and there's a few others where they didn't do it right, and they just didn't consider the use and the neighborhood and the setbacks and the impact to the community in general, and weren't careful about it. And so there's a downside to Del Norte County not being a little bit behind other counties because we don't have regulations yet. But the upside is that our first round of regulations, I think, will be much better than some of the other counties who didn't do it right, caused a lot of problems, and then now have some legal difficulties on their hands for rolling out ordinances that weren't very good and now having trouble changing them. Sure, exactly. And so I think that Del Norte has been recognized. There's groups that maintain lists of counties and cities that are in the regulation process. And Del Norte's been recognized a few times as being one of the counties that had a good reason for having a ban. And the main reason that was printed is concerns over real estate value speculation, for not jumping into it too soon. And also commendations on forming this style of policymaking, a public working group that works on consensus. It's not that common. A lot of governments use the planning commission to make decisions, and it tends to be a little bit more internal versus this process, which is very open, public, and is supposed to be steered by the public, by folks like you who make the time to make comment. And it's difficult during the workday, I get it, to come, so a lot of people can't come. So if people have anything at all to say, you can write it down. You can give it to somebody who can come. You can email your concerns to the Board of Supervisors, and they'll get those concerns to us, and we can discuss it. So you don't just have to come to these meetings. There's a lot of different ways to reach this group with your concerns and comments. And yeah, our job is to take all those seriously. And I think in the end, we're going to come up with a really good set of regulations that works for everybody, that really respects individuals' private property rights, the right to live free of nuisances. That's the most important thing, and I think we'll be able to do that. Thanks. All right, so yeah, sounds like we kind of wrapped up, for the most part, manufacturing, using the CUP process to make individual determinations about types of manufacturing. I think
Jesse,
processing can go in there, yeah.
is manufacturing a water-intensive process or not?
It can. There are water-based extractions, but I wouldn't say they're water-intensive. You know, like a car wash would use way more water than a manufacturing operation. I'm not really an expert in it, but I don't think so, no. All right, we can just kind of move toward cultivation discussion generally, since that's where the direction is going, if that's all right with everybody.
So we have a pretty good consensus on manufacturing, and
I think so. What do you think, Joel? Are we making sense in a way that makes sense to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty comfortable. There are a few open questions for me that I'll kind of work on at the staff level.
Okay.
But I think when an ordinance does come back to you guys, it's going to be something that lawyers have looked at, it's going to be something that planners have looked at. And so it might look a lot different than what you're thinking, but it should capture the concerns and the ideas. And I think it's going to be pretty close to what you're thinking it's going to be, from what I've heard so far.
Excellent.
Did we, because I can't remember what the last meeting about that, did we come up with any type of setback at all, or are we good with there being no setback on a,
Oh,
on a
right.
manufacturing?
Well, we're going to use the planning commission and use permit process for that, I think. Was the idea.
I think it's something that I want to look at with Heidi. You know, typically you would use your lower intensity commercial as a buffer between higher intensity and residential, rather than having setbacks. I don't know that our C zones are really arranged that way. Rather than distinguishing it by a specific setback or by the specific zone, it might make a lot more sense to have it have some sort of consideration at the use permit level for impacts and proximities to residential. But it's something I want to look at.
All right, excellent.
Did we discuss doing it also by the type of manufacturer, type 6 versus type N versus type P, and the permitting process?
If I remember correctly, we just split it into volatile is banned and non-volatile is all treated the same, with an extra finding for CO2 and ethanol. I think that was the simpler way to do it, rather than, what were those, like edible and?
Yeah, the P was like packaging and edible.
I think separate treatment for those
Okay.
under ordinance is kind of unnecessary.
Right. Separate finding requirements, though, by the planning commission. Okay. All right, sounds good. So cultivation zoning, we have some maps on that. We talked about not including the agricultural zoning at all, at least in the beginning. Ag department gets a thumbs up there. I think that simplifies things. So that right there, I think, takes care of a lot of the problems.
Why was that be? Why would ag zoning not be a likely zone for growing a plant?
I think I would be more comfortable if it didn't displace existing agriculture. I think we have a lot of areas out in the county that are suitable for cannabis cultivation without displacing existing agriculture. But it'd be interesting to hear from some of the, especially the Smith River constituents, if they feel that way too or not. If any of the existing growers are interested in getting into that, I'm not sure, but it seems just like there's a lot of areas in the county that it could move to, so that's the way I feel that way.
I think one of the concerns we need to address is water use, whether it's the impacts on residents or the impacts on ecosystems, fish, wildlife, forests. You can pretty much grow marijuana in a lot of places, but you can only grow salmon, steelhead, redwoods in a few places. And so I would like to suggest that whenever cultivation takes place in a watershed and depends on surface water collection or wells or anything else, there should be at least a watershed analysis and an analysis on the demands for water that are going to be introduced as competing resources for residents as well as for wildlife and ecosystems.
Yeah, sorry.
I know that in southern Oregon, I have friends that live there. There's a huge growing operations in the valley, and they're having problems with their water, their well water going dry. A lot of people, and a lot of people are on wells. So in relationship to what you said, how that's affecting the environment, and what you said about the agricultural issues and the growing, which is, it's fine, but my question is, how are these growers going to be regulated in terms of their pesticides and fertilizers that they use? Who knows what they're putting on their plants? Who knows how these are going to affect the ecosystem, the water system, And this is my big concern. How is that going to be regulated?
What you're saying there, that's kind of as far as this goes, for the pesticide issue, that's an outdated issue, because all of the product that's grown under these licenses and sold through the state of California is required to undergo testing, and there's essentially nothing that you can put on your plant, and it can still be sold as far as a pesticide goes. That's a contamination.
Nothing?
Essentially, nothing. Like what's
Not
happening right
nothing,
now.
But a limited.
Not nothing, but there's almost nothing.
The limits will come.
It's in this extreme organic situation. What's being done right now, as far as pesticide applications and whatnot on commercial cannabis grows, is completely different than what will be allowed under these new state regulations.
And will they be testing these crops periodically?
Every batch of product that's sold through the state has to go through a testing situation. And I've heard stories about people's cannabis failing the tests because of what other applications have been done a mile away. So there are essentially, you're not spraying anything or applying pesticides like that as has been done in the past.
Okay.
Your concerns are definitely valid,
Yeah.
though, because, like Kurt's saying, the standards for cannabis through the state are extremely high. Currently, right now, there aren't any, to go through the testing, you can't have anything show up because there isn't any listed approved pesticides and chemicals for cannabis because it hasn't gone through the testing process, USDA, I guess. So the feds, well, that's how does, on a larger scale, and then California regulates it separately. So there will be at some point some definitions on what can be used and the levels, just like any crop. And then, but for right now, the standards are extremely high and all the batches are tested, but that's all on paper. So there's definitely a different discussion. And so when I look at like the water board requirements, for example, and the state requirements, they're extremely stringent. But that's only if you're following the rules, right? And that's dependent on enforcement. And so that's where Dr. Kate Fisher has a lot more experience than I do on what actually happens. And the difference between what the water board has on paper and what they're actually have the ability to enforce, and potentially what they're maybe backing down from. I don't know if they're going to continue to demand these high standards that came in the beginning. So your concerns are valid. In my opinion, the best way to regulate and limit these impacts is to limit the scale of the farms. And so if the farms are limited to a very small scale, then I think that most of the impacts are mitigated by effect of that. So we're talking about the smallest scale allowed by the state, some of the beginning tiers of and these are limited by size, square footage of a garden. And so that just naturally limits your water usage, your inputs of pesticides, if you are ever going to be able to use any, the number of people working the farm, and all the impacts associated with that.
And so is there any way of testing the water level prior to and after the operations?
Right, groundwater stuff, yeah, that's so, I believe in California, groundwater is still largely unregulated. And maybe in agricultural situations, but the water board is moving to regulate groundwater. I don't know how long that will take and how successful they'll be, but surface water regulation is very strict. But again, it all comes to compliance and enforcement resources.
That's
So,
a challenge up here.
Sure.
And yeah, and I'll leave at this point, but my concern is on the basis of what happened in Oregon, and they didn't have the foresight, again, to think
Sure.
about the potential of the water being, overused. And so now, it's basically too late. A lot of people's wells are going dry. So I see what happened there, and I think about the potential of something like that happening up here. And in a rural community, they tend to be lax.
Sure.
And Crescent City's no different. So.
Right. Yeah, the water board is their plan is to, well, they already monitor in-stream flows. They have gauges in the creeks and stuff. And so when they're talking about issuing permits for these farms in the mountains, they have standards for, in-stream flow rates. And their plan is to come in and regulate, and they want to put meters on wells. And there's been talk here in this county just generally, on everything, but specifically for cannabis permits. And that's supposed to help them to be able to determine whether or not they're going to attempt to regulate groundwater extractions. I have no idea what that looks like legally, the timeline, how that works, But I don't think it'd be a bad idea for the county to maybe in parallel try to model some of the principles that the water board is trying to lay down, even if the water board doesn't have the resources or if they don't stick to it. Maybe the county could. I don't know how that works either. But
All right, well, thank you.
thank you.
I can speak to some of those pesticide
please.
issues too. So if the county creates a commercial production ordinance, now these grows, the commercial grows, will become production agriculture. And they'll be regulated similarly to how any other production agriculture is. So growers, if they're applying pesticides, are going to need to get an operator ID. They're going to need to report their pesticide use monthly to our department. We'll be tracking that. We'll be conducting headquarters inspections, making sure the workers are trained and have the proper personal protective equipment. All of that type of stuff that we currently do with production agriculture would be happening out there. I can't say at our current staffing levels, and depending on how many grows come above board and get licensed, I don't know how long that would take, but that we would be working our way through all of that as quickly as we could.
And see, so, and another thing to your concern about all of that is that, again, kind of reiterated the same thing, we're in this gray area of a year. And so in Humboldt County and Delaware County, any county, this person's water isn't right, the water board doesn't like it, or the pesticide application isn't good and the county ag department doesn't like it. Well, that person doesn't even have a license. They don't need a license. They're operating individually without control, right? So they can just wipe these people away and say, well, we're just doing what we're doing. It's our thing, stay away. But in 2019, when licenses come out and permits and whatnot, the county can yank that person's permit to continue operation, suspend it, they're done, right? So all of these things that people haven't had to comply with necessarily will be reined in, and people will have to start complying, and a lot of these concerns, like you were asking about water and pests, all of these things will come to a head, and these growers who in the past haven't complied with any of this will be forced to. Otherwise, they can be shut down under a much more direct method.
So just to put this in perspective, I want to take you back. If we treat cannabis as an agricultural product, it is being far more strictly regulated than all the other agricultural products that are currently being produced in this county. Fewer pesticides, fewer land areas that are allowed to be used. The zoning is going to be more restrictive. It's all going to be more restrictive. What we're trying to come up with, in a sense, is where is it okay to grow cannabis? Regardless of whether we support cannabis being legal, it is legal. And so the question is, how do we do it right in Del Norte County so we don't impact families and children, we don't diminish the diversity and vibrancy of our community and our agriculture, we don't damage the ecosystems. And that is the whole point of this working group. That is the goal of the working group. And so I think if you keep that in mind, your comments help us move toward that, because you will tell us things that we don't know, because we don't know everything. In fact, we know very little. But if the work group stays focused on that goal and the community helps us get there, then we'll come up with a model for having cannabis legally in the community in a way that does the least harm and the most good.
Well said, thank you.
I wanted to make a comment on cannabis in ag. Some people know or don't know that there's still hemp that is considered cannabis in a lot of areas, and that's one reason that I was kind of wanting to get on this board, is that in agricultural areas, I would like to see hemp still be available to cultivate. Hemp is not the smelly marijuana type of stuff. It's more of the productive stuff where you can get fibers and oils and that kind of stuff. And so if we're going to have a no ag zone for cannabis, I'd like to at least be able to see hemp grown in ag.
Is there another way to, if the goal is to protect the diversity of agriculture in Del Norte County, which I believe it is, then is there another way besides banning cannabis in agricultural zones that we can get to that same goal that will allow hemp and other products to be cultivated? Is there a more creative way to approach it?
Well, I mean, to Jesse's point about size, if it's 10,000 square feet or smaller, we're not talking about displacing whole fields. Hemp is really completely independent of this. We couldn't do anything to hemp if we wanted to. So we're really just talking about where are we going to put the grows and how big. I think size does a lot of that.
The California hemp program, I don't know where they are with it. It's sort of stuck in the middle, I think, somewhere. But when it does get going, that'd be separate from these ordinances entirely. And so I don't even know how.
We have specific grant of authority over cannabis, and the definition of cannabis excludes hemp. So whatever the state does with hemp, the state does with hemp.
Yeah, so just as a agricultural representative in Del Norte County, Bobby's also on this board, and I can't speak for Bobby, but I can say that if this county decides to disallow cannabis production in agriculturally zoned properties, I feel like that's a mistake on the county's part. You have a tremendous amount of agriculturally zoned properties that are not being utilized. And if we're talking about small scale operations, these could be perfect places for such operations. We have many newish, I would say, farms popping up in these small zoned agricultural properties, ag zone properties, and whether it be through greenhouses or not necessarily indoor production, that would be kind of a different scenario, or outdoor or mixed light scenarios. These are perfect properties for cannabis production. You have access to water, you have reduced runoff potential, and these are zoned as ag for a reason. These properties and lands are essentially chosen as good places for growing and or cattle production per se, animal production, but agricultural type situations. And in the future, it's highly probable that eventually down the line, the federal government may in fact designate and remove designations of cannabis, which would open up to ag properties in general. And so arbitrarily picking landowners that own these properties and telling them they could never use it for such seems a little bit short-sighted, on my opinion, by the county. So if we're talking about allowing stuff in forest zones or other commercial zones, it seems like ag properties that have access to all these resources that are perfectly necessary and proper would be just a fine place to do it. And then we can mitigate it through size. If you're talking about reduced and small grows, you're not talking about wiping out all other ag production. It's small scale and so forth. So
I agree.
It's a thought.
I definitely agree with that. I think that if ag is going to be excluded, then it should be not forever. It should be just, if we're going to do that, the purpose of it would be to simplify things in the beginning. I think that was sort of the what I was hearing. I don't think that excluding it from ag zones forever makes any sense at all. It's an agricultural endeavor. It belongs in ag property.
Did I apologize? I wasn't at the last meeting. At the beginnings of the commercial discussions, what was the size limit the group was looking at this point?
Under 10,000 square feet, I think. I'm pushing for a little smaller than that for the beginning. I don't know how that, my question for Joel would be, how easy is it to prevent license stacking? You know, preventing somebody from getting 4 10,000 square foot permits. This, you know, there isn't any state hurdles to that. What are the county tools?
It would be very easy to
Okay.
just say one
Per applicant, per,
per property, per
what if you had a
applicant,
bunch of
per
adjacent
parcel.
parcels?
You could theoretically list all those type things under that declaration,
You
right?
get rid of the
Per person, per
loopholes
parcel, per,
Okay.
I've seen that listed on other places, commercial production things,
Okay.
talking about. listing
Yeah,
it.
I'm not worried about
Okay.
that. We can make that pretty
And I'm
easy.
thinking 2,500 square feet to 10,000 square feet,
I would,
somewhere in there.
hate to see it limited to parcel, because there's the opportunity perhaps for a good property to, you know, become a park, you know, to sublease to other smaller entrepreneurs, you know, so that,
Mhm.
you know, maybe you'd have someone who subleases,
Sure.
you know, little farms or to that sort of. And agriculture, I'd love to, you know, see us mitigate the concerns of the folks that show up today. I know, I think they're talking about an agricultural zone property that butts up with residential. I'd like to see allowed in agriculture. I'm sure we could find setbacks from
Right.
residential properties that would mitigate a lot of these concerns.
I think so too. I think at our last meeting, there was concerns about a property, an ag zone property that's just, it's in the proximity of a residential zone. And so maybe instead of excluding the zone, there was also talk of just having very large setbacks, 1,000 feet or more, or something like that, that would then take care of the issue. And then appropriate ag zone could then be utilized.
So could I ask a question? We talked about for retail using size and density as a mechanism for regulating the distribution and number of retail outlets. Could we not do the same thing for basically cultivation? Limit the number in a region, limit the density, limit the adjacency, so that you couldn't have contiguous parcels under cultivation, so that you would, in a sense, limit the impact that way on both the diversity of agricultural products and on the neighborhoods and residents in the region. Would that be a workable solution?
It's workable. I think my fear would be that you take, maybe there should be an area where it's ideal and inoffensive, and you spread them out throughout the county by making them not adjacent. Those are all interesting policy considerations we could talk about.
On Church Street, because my name is Josh Clemens.
I noticed the plastic was off of that greenhouse right
Yeah, the
after
plastic
this
is now
meeting.
off the greenhouse, so it's really not contained in any way, shape, or form. It is not under that owner's imminent control. There's a 4-acre parcel, and the house is all the way over on Elk Valley Road, and they have that grow pushed as far close to their neighbor as they possibly can.
Wow.
I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. So I get where they're coming from. I stopped by, I talked to the neighbors, and they said, yeah, the smell's starting to get pretty bad. And I'm looking at it going, we talked about this during the personal cultivation. It has to be closer to your home
Sure.
than your neighbor's house, because I believe you used the term, it has to be under your imminent control, right? You have to.
I don't think I use that term, but yeah, I get the idea. I think what I'm hearing, and I haven't been out to see that property, but I can't imagine there's anything this group would do that would make a situation like that a permittable operation,
Right.
for just so many reasons.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the way it was described to us, it was underneath a greenhouse, it was under a hoop house, you can't see the plants from the road. You absolutely can. I mean, you drive up there and you look right through the fence, it's right there, they're growing over the top of it. And I was like, wow, that's,
Yeah.
why is that not shut down yet?
When I drove by, I saw the plastic off. I thought it was all
Right.
taken apart.
Yeah. I was like, oh, you
That's
know,
even
I
worse
know
with the
that hoop
plastic.
house because I've showed property in the area before, and I'm driving
Wow.
by and I don't see the hoop house anymore, and I'm going, oh, wow, they're just blatantly, you know, basically,
Yeah.
you know, messing with the neighborhood.
Sure. Yeah, I don't
Um,
know. Code enforcement thing. I don't know. We got
Yeah, we need
an
to
ordinance
jump on
kicking
that
in
one.
and shortly, I think.
I'll write a blight report if I have.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I don't know what complaints have been actually made to code enforcement. This group obviously doesn't enforce complaints.
No.
But, you know, to the extent that these are the kinds of considerations that need to go to an ordinance, it's a valuable discussion. You know, from my perspective, the things that will regulate and control on ag land are gonna be, you know, CEQA review, visual resources, minimum lot sizes with setbacks. We're gonna, you know, strike some balance between being, you know, not visible, but also not behind a big black fence, you know, something like that. Size, 10,000 square feet is not that big. I think all of these things mixed together will naturally limit and control this. And things like this house over here, or this grow, you know, those won't be things that we're permitting. You know?
I also wanted to kind of speak to the pesticide issue. Most of the misconception about the pesticides that are used on cannabis are actually rodenticides that are being used in these outdoor grows that are just absolutely devastating the wildlife because you're poisoning a base level food chain, and it just works its way up into the predatory side, and that's absolutely uncalled for. I don't think that they're, you know, you may be able to have rodenticides down on the ground in your outdoor grow that's not going to contaminate your, you know, your product by the time you test it, but it's still there. So that's a major problem. I know that on the hydroponic indoor side of it, Holland has basically outlawed all fungicides. And for the first couple of years there, they lost 40% of their crops. And they're starting to get into like organic amino acid additives that actually go into the hydroponic side and increase the uptake of calcium, and they have zero fungicide lost, and their Brix is like 40% higher. So there's ways to get around it. You don't need to use pesticides. And as far as the water use is concerned, the number one way to kill a cannabis plant is water too much. They really don't require as much water as, say, like lily bulb fields or anything else. So. And I believe the state permitting process, you have to go through the water control board if you're not on a city, right?
Yeah,
If you're not
it's
on,
pretty
not on city or
yeah.
your own well, which,
It's very stringent. No matter no matter what your water source, you have to have a water board permit, and they address all kinds of things like slope, proximity to watersheds, all the classes of
runoff,
watersheds.
all that, yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah, they're most concerned about roads, I've noticed, because they generate sediment and runoff. So roads, road maintenance, especially
Oh,
roads
like,
where they're.
like putting roads. in
Yeah, any
places,
roads that you have on your property, particularly unpaved roads, especially where where you have a water crossing, a lot of requirements there. That seems to be their larger concern actually, because that's the bigger generator of sediment is travel.
Right.
And then the more intense the operation gets, you get a lot of traffic on roads that are definitely not suitable for heavy truck traffic, you know, or medium duty truck traffic even.
A lot of egress problems from going from a vacant land forested area to a commercial property where somebody's
But I
coming in.
see all this from the paper side of it, you know, and so Kate sees it from the practical side of it more, I think. And so I don't know, you know, the water board can talk a big talk, but I don't know what resources they're going to have to actually enforce. They issue permits without
best laid plans, right?
inspection.
I mean,
sure. So I don't, so there may be a disconnect
So
there.
one thing that you were saying about the rodenticides, one thing that most people can't wrap their head around is the fact that you or me or any of us as just a citizen can walk in to any of these stores and buy a rodenticide that as a commercial applicator you cannot.
Right.
You can walk in and buy decon, but if you have a permit from the ag department to apply in a commercial setting, you can't.
Yeah, can't do it.
And so a lot of these rodenticides that have been causing so many problems over the years
Are
in
from
these
unregulated
outdoor grows,
Right.
the ag department per se has no ability to regulate it because they're just a private citizen doing something on their own property, but once they become commercialized and permitted and applicator numbered, all of that poof goes away legally.
It doesn't stop you from doing it.
Doesn't stop you from
still-
doing it, but it could stop you from doing it, and it
Sure.
could stop your whole commercial situation could go
Absolutely.
gone because you broke the rules.
I see.
Yeah, that's why, I mean, I just kind of say that for everybody's general information is, you know, the faster that we get these things done and the better that we can regulate this market, a lot of these problems get solved.
The problem about it is, this year, again, we could have this rule and law in place right now, and we still couldn't stop that per se from happening because it would take until 2019 for us to really rein it in with these regulations. So.
Right, the entire effort will come to naught if we don't enforce. And so a lot of this is going to be figuring out how to fund the enforcement of whatever code gets written. And so it may mean that there has to be some kind of tax on the cannabis that supports the enforcement. And so that's one of the things that's going to have to be dealt with.
Yes, vote for the tax. It'll be on the ballot in November. A tax for the commercial segments of cannabis. Vote for the tax. It'll help the county to have the funds and resources for enforcement.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I can't speak for all the other departments, but I know that I certainly have concerns in my department about being able to get out to all those places. We basically have one inspector. I'm licensed and trained in that too, but I also have, you know, roles and duties heading the department and heading animal control. So, you know, one person is, same thing with code enforcement, I'm sure, not going to be able to go out and get to 100 grows or whatever it turns out to be in any timely fashion. So.
Sure. I see high permit fees being appropriate, at least in the beginning.
So, my button there. So just to give, and I'm not suggesting we start talking about fees or anything at the moment, but you know, the permitting fees is where we're supposed to derive the money that's necessary to enforce all of the regulations. The tax is is quote unquote an extra going to the county that the county can use for anything they wanted, whether it be cannabis, animal control, housing, whatever, right? But I was just looking at this county's particular tax structure, or not tax structure, fee structure setup. So they're talking about several $1,000s per license, and you're talking about hundreds of licenses, right? And so we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars to the enforcement side, whether it be ag department, the zoning office, all of these things. In additional, it talks about, and this one, I liked the way that the Trinity County, I think it is, talked about it. Is it Trinity? Yeah, Trinity County. When they put this together, they talked about going in like a year later and doing an assessment, a fee assessment, and determining if the fees that they were garnering were enough. And if not at that point, they would reassess either raising the fees or lowering the fees. But they actually talked about that in their actual ordinance. And so I think the discussion of how we adjust the fees would be appropriate to put in, particularly the commercial production ordinance that we're talking about writing. And the retail is probably not a huge number of businesses and whatnot, but the production side of it, like I said, could be hundreds. I hope it's probably not thousands, but it's 200, 300, 400, 500, could be hundreds of applicants.
There's probably dozens in the first, not more than dozens in the first year or two. I'd say.
Yeah.
So the other thing I think you need to look at, and I've been involved with the Humboldt County process, is the schedule for inspections. They have looked at an annual schedule, which has an announced visit, so that everybody is aware of when the inspections are, et cetera. I think that's probably not going to be adequate to enforce. It will make the people who choose to follow the laws, but it will not catch the bad actors. And so I think unannounced inspections at more than an annual rate will be necessary. And so I think once we have an idea of how many permits there are, it's just simple math to figure out, okay, what is it going to cost to hire the personnel to do the enforcement at a schedule?
You know, a lot of counties have just application fees that are in the many thousands of dollars before you even get to buy your permit. So I think that can help too. I think just the application process can cost the county quite a bit of money.
Oh, and the ag department conducts, surveillance. We drive around production areas and see who's applying pesticides, or drive around town and see if there's structural applicators, like, what companies that come to your home and such. So presumably we would tie all this other commercial production, treat it equitably to existing commercial production agriculture in that manner.
State law requires that the permit holders have their facility open to state regulators unannounced, I believe, without appointments or anything. I think under the same model, the county could do the same thing, where the state, because up here, the state's not going to have a lot of people. The question was specifically state or government regulators. I don't know. Yeah, I'm not
The
sure.
ag department will have that authority under food and ag code. I can't speak to, any of the other departments, but yeah.
And then can we have, for setbacks, is there a workable way to have a setback specifically from a residential zone? Can you define a residential zone clearly? How would that work?
That shouldn't be hard. I mean, we know where the residential zones are. I think, though, that it might need to be a little more sophisticated than a mere setback. The number of feet might not be sufficient to kind of encapsulate the harms you're mitigating. Line of sight, visibility, I don't know, grade, hill, water usage, a lot of things probably need to go into. I guess maybe to pull back a little bit, when we're talking about putting on ag land is designated ag land because it's the right place to have agriculture. That's where we kind of, as a county, have decided it's the right area for it. Now we're looking at cannabis that we don't want to treat as just any other agricultural product. And until now, we've always been considering timberland, which is area that specifically is not designed for agriculture. The water resources aren't there. It's next to a lot more environmentally sensitive areas. But one of the reasons we were thinking that is it's more remote, it's more hidden. It will have less, it'd be less annoying to the community. And it will, because of that, because it's remote, raise your compliance costs, right? Both for the person getting the permit and for the people inspecting. So, this is why this is the thing we waited till the end for. It's by far the most complicated. It's by far the thing with the most competing interests. And so, we might kind of go around in circles for a while before we nail down a workable, framework. I think, though, kind of nailing down the intensity that we're talking about and then deciding where to put it would be best, rather than trying to decide where and then think about intensity. Indoor or outdoor might be the first conversation before we even get to square footage. Is it important to do both? I know we have a proposed tax ordinance for both. Is the same consideration going to exist for indoor, outdoor on ag land that it does, on TPZ, things like that? I don't know.
Yeah, that's something that we have been forgetting to talk about and make a distinction, indoor and outdoor. I consider indoor to be more of a manufacturing operation. It's very similar to cannabis manufacturing operations, same sort of intensity, containment, ability to contain, can be labor intensive. But a lot of
So
these,
I would weigh in on that. And so when we're talking about indoor versus outdoor, so let's talk about indoor for a few moments. We're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, essentially completely 100% supplied light, right? Like a totally inside of a contained structure.
Yeah, an enclosed building.
Enclosed building.
Completely with artificial light.
Completely maintained with artificial light, essentially artificial growing environment. And so in that scenario, I would be an advocate that we should require these commercial indoor grows, that they would be required with a set amount of air filtration systems and whatnot. I'm not sure if that's required by the state or not. I don't think so, but I find that would be a completely appropriate situation as the county to weigh in and say that indoor commercial would be required to have a filtration system, and I would have to get more in tune in all the things that are required to do that, whether it would be the watering system and all of that stuff. But with that, with a air filtration system, I would think that we could be having smaller setbacks. We could be talking about doing it in commercially zoned properties, or maybe any zoned properties other than residential, and with obviously possibly a smaller setback than an outdoor situation from zones.
Are these grows done in transparent buildings or closed, non-transparent buildings?
Generally enclosed buildings that are non-transparent and don't bleed light out. Although I have to look at it again. I think they don't make that distinction specifically at the state level. I think they define it as primarily lit with artificial light, so you can
Correct.
but there's also, so then with that comes the restrictions on the amount of light you're allowed to emit, and that
Correct.
plays with the mixed light
Correct.
things also, so.
I mean, one thing we don't have to go with the state regulations necessarily. We have to be more stringent or equally stringent. So we could define indoor growing as non-light emitting growing.
Sure.
And that would be one way around it.
Yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have to block out somebody from, if they had a facility that somehow let sunlight in, but didn't let artificial light out. There are systems like that. But I get what you're saying. I think that's important to clearly define indoor growing as where you're not emitting any light at any level. It's enclosed space. And that's appropriate for in manufacturing zones, I think. Indoor cultivation is ideally suited in commercial and manufacturing zones, a similar kind of thing. Other counties that have, permitted outdoor farms are also allowing indoor cultivation on those farms, inside buildings. I think for the most part they're making them be on the grid. You're not allowed to grow with lights with a generator exclusively, I believe, so that's right. I think that might be a state rule even. I don't know. But I would agree with following that model. But farms that are permitted for an outdoor grow that are on the grid, I think makes sense if they can build a building, to code in all of their senses, then it makes sense to be able to allow indoor cultivation there also. And for outdoor cultivation, indoor cultivation is a big part. If you're going to run a year-round farm, you have to do some indoor cultivation. You may not be producing finished product, but you're going to be running a nursery operation year-round in the spring, especially. So there needs to be some allowance for that on the farm.
You don't necessarily need indoor cultivation as much as you need light-assisted cultivation.
Yeah, you need the option to be able to do whatever works best for your business,
Yeah.
I think. So it depends on your farming style, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I have, yeah. I know what you're talking about, yeah. Thank you.
So, I mean, it kind of falls underneath for the indoor stuff, it does actually fall underneath a lot of the home businesses. And they've already basically got the permitted zones and then those zones that require a use permit. And I was reading this the other day at the ERC meeting, and I just happened to pick it up while I was waiting for the meeting to start. And it really pretty clearly defines what a home business is and what a home occupation is. And I think cannabis falls underneath this pretty well. But they do have a clause in here that says like clinics, medical laboratories, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't say anything about gardening, but a lot of these things shall not be deemed to be home occupations. And it doesn't say anything about agriculture. But it like doesn't generate pedestrian traffic, produces no evidence of existence beyond its dwelling, involves no on-site sales, is confined within the dwelling, carried on only by the members of the family occupying the dwelling, does not entail the conversion of a room into a sales room or group meeting room. That's pretty much it. So, I mean, I believe you've already got the guidelines for a lot of the indoor growing stuff here. And, you know, as far as the smell is concerned, indoor grows, if you require them to have the filtration and everything, which I think the state permit already does, you know, you're not going to have the intrusiveness. You could have somebody 50 feet away from you and you'd never know it was there. So
Sure. Yeah,
might be something you can just kind of piggyback on.
right. Yeah, I'm familiar with that code section, and I think that may apply more to residential zones. Those are specific sort of. So I don't know if that's something that the
You know,
county wants to talk about.
we don't, I mean, I can tell you Heidi and I don't want to touch, you know, home enterprise, home occupations with cannabis. That's, even if you could completely 100% mitigate the effects, you take an ordinance to the board that allows it in residential zones, it's going to fail. I think it's a bad
I
move.
agree. I think so too. I think it's too big a step, you know. I think, you know, that's something that a community could talk about for many years.
You can grow into it. but
Sure.
I don't want
Yes,
to do
grow
it.
into it. Very good, Joel. Thank you.
So what are the zonings? Let's talk quickly more about indoor. That's might be a more easy subject to try to move through a little bit. What are the appropriate zonings? Obviously, commercial zoning property would be appropriate. Pretty much, are we talking about any zoning other than residential? And what we talked earlier, what was it? I can't remember, it was C1 or C, whatever that, the smallest zoning is.
C1.
C1, right? So,
We weren't including C1 in anything, I don't think, right?
yeah, but,
Yeah.
yeah, so
starting
like
at
residential and
C2.
C1 would maybe not be a appropriate
Sure.
place for that, but
Sure.
commercial zonings other than that, and then ag zonings, TPZ zonings, what other zonings are there? I'm not
TPZ
quite-
generally isn't on the grid.
Yeah, exactly, generally. Although what happens a lot of time is people take a TPZ zone and then they apply for a building permit and then it has to come out of, it has to be
There's,
rezoned.
yeah,
sometimes-
there's TPZ property right here in town. It's all over the place. So it's, the zoning is weird. There's a lot of TPZ that shouldn't be TPZ that probably should be rezoned.
So I think, I mean, one of the environmental virtues of indoor is that you can do it on the grid. You can do it with actual plumbing, and without a generator. I think one of the real issues that needs to be dealt with, you know, anything off the grid is generator noise.
Yeah, you can't do it, I
Yeah.
think. It's not allowed at the, I think at the state level, you can't grow indoor exclusively with a generator. It's not allowed.
Well, good.
So yeah, I don't think we're talking about.
Well, I
that, not
guess when we
off-grid
get to
indoor.
mixed light conversations or greenhouses,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
different details.
um,
But just straight indoor, I think it's, wherever we're doing manufacturing, I think it should just be the same, just include indoor in the manufacturing.
So we should double check the state regulations and if the state regulations aren't already requiring generator, you know, being on the grid per se, I think they do, like you're saying, that would definitely be something that the county, I have no issue with adding that in there, that if you're going to do an indoor grow, it should be on power grid. And-
well,
and
then in addition
primary
to,
power source.
you know, the C zonings and the M zonings, since most of our ag land is in the coastal zone, and, you know, I know from the coastal commission, what's most likely to get certified by them is an ordinance that allows no new buildings. You do it in existing buildings. Is it really even worthwhile to allow it on ag land? You know, are there buildings that could be converted to this that aren't greenhouses, I guess would be my question.
I think that's probably where most of the buildings in the county that are suitable are on big ag land.
I think there's a fair number of the buildings in those ag zone lands or coastal area lands that could be easily converted, or at least converted nonetheless.
Kurt, right now, isn't it fair to say there's quite a few greenhouses up in, say, the Smith River ag area that aren't being used for anything at the moment?
Yeah, I would think that's fair to say. I mean, the greenhouse, there's lots of little, small scale greenhouse production happening in the Smith River, greater Smith River, Fort Dick area.
But are we not excluding greenhouses from indoor grows?
Greenhouses are not indoor situations.
If there's no emitted light, then they're not?
Yeah, greenhouse would be considered outdoor.
Greenhouse is
Yeah.
not, it's not on the definition of an indoor situation. There's a light situation that could potentially weigh in on that. But as far as indoor goes, no, but so yeah, I think there are a fair number, and there's also a fair number of just buildings in general that are just essentially almost not even used at this point that could be used in that situation. Now, who owns them and what they want to do with them is a whole different story, but there's definitely a lot of buildings that are completely vacant.
Joel, are greenhouses structures per the Coastal Commission?
Yeah. Yeah, you need a development permit in the coastal zone to do a greenhouse.
You need one in your backyard. If it's a bigger than whatever, 5 by 10 or something like that. 10 by 10, yeah. Yeah.
So the state's rolling out requirements for like carbon credit stuff. It looks like you got to buy, and a certain percentage of zero net energy renewable source. It's pretty strict. You got to have some green power going on.
Should we talk about setbacks from your own property line for indoor commercial production? For example, that you can't be it couldn't be like within 5 feet of your property line when you're building and all that stuff. Or should we just consider setbacks from
Depends on the
other
zoning,
people's?
probably. Like in manufacturing zones, you can build a building right on the property line. So that would be different than maybe an ag zone. And that's where Joel's talking about, it's a little bit more sophisticated than just a setback. An ag land, if there's a residential zone, there may be a different scene than if you have an ag, 100-acre ag parcel and you're surrounded by other 100-acre ag parcels, then you may not need a setback on your own property line. I don't know. That gets too complicated. I tried to work in complicated things like that in the personal ordinance, and it wasn't needed. But maybe with this, maybe the number of permits will be small enough that it will be workable to have more details like that.
Yeah, I mean, probably it needs to be taken zone by zone. What are the considerations for a commercial zone? What are the considerations for manufacturing? How up to the various types of ag, including forest ag, things like that. There's also issues about, rezoning TPZ, which can get real fun. There's PO land that I want to rezone all of it. There's a lot of moving parts. So I think probably just keep getting out the ideas, getting out the things.
Well, I was concerned about the TPZ, and I don't know about all of the specifics on all of those lands. But it was my understanding, and maybe I'm totally off base with this, that TPZ, that's timber production zoning, right? It's
Right.
property that's solely determined, I don't know how many years ago, in the 70s or something, right? Maybe before that was for timber production only. And if you go into that property and do anything like get a building permit on that piece of property, aren't you supposed to then have it rezoned?
There's waivers, there's exceptions. You can do things on there that don't interfere with the use as timber
You
zone.
can get a use permit for a house.
You can get a use permit. There's certain things you can do. And then, yeah, there's conversion permits and waivers from conversion permits. The thing about TPZ is that it's tax-free. You pay taxes on the yield. There's a lot of land where nobody really has any intention of ever harvesting it, or that's not really valuable for it. I think the county would be loath to see people on tax-free land with viable cannabis businesses. That would not seem fair.
So the thing that concerned me the most in that scenario was that if we're talking about TPZ, since we're jumping all over the place, zone property that's essentially, like you say, tax-free, and then somebody goes in and acquires a commercial cannabis production permit on that property, it seems like it would obviously need to be rezoned now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the problem that I see with that is that if we don't limit the number of permits on TPZ land, all of a sudden you get all these people buying up all these permits, right, and putting them on TPZ land, forcing the county to rezone them, and then the cannabis industry goes bust, and then everyone that owns these properties, the county has to foreclose on them, I guess, right, because they can't pay the taxes now on this piece of property. potentially.
Well,
That's a pretty slippery slope.
yeah, so what happens is you apply for a rezone, and then you have to kind of pay like 9 years worth of taxes,
Yeah,
whatever.
10-year amortization.
Yeah,
of taxes.
And so it's expensive, or it can be. I mean, we're not talking about huge property values usually, but it can be. There's definitely an upfront cost to rezoning. And so I guess my solution to that problem would be if the use permits are stringent enough, there's enough requirements, there's not going to be that much demand for them or that much land available. So we won't get a rush of people rezoning their TPZ. And then, a lot of that TPZ is owned by actual timber companies that I guess we'll see what they do. We'll see if they subdivide and convert, but I don't expect them to. So yeah, some mechanism to prevent all of our TPZ land from turning into.
The board's not
Forest Ag.
obligated to grant a rezone, right? I mean, it's up to the board, right? It's not, like some property is not suitable to rezone TPZ maybe.
The TPZ rezone requires a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors. It
Right.
also, if it's an immediate TPZ rezone, it also requires approval by the California Board of Forestry.
Right.
So could
it's
we
a bit of
not,
review.
could we not just require that all TPZ rezoning go through the timberland conversion process? Would that not address a lot of those issues?
It would, but not the tax issue, I think, for the
No,
county.
I think we should make any use permit, be a rezone, not just conversion of timber, but actually turn it into forest ag or something, so that you pay
But
taxes
both.
on it.
If you're going to go and cut trees, then you need to get either a conversion permit or an exemption from a conversion permit from the state. I think that's,
Well,
you have to have that
I mean,
anyway.
I can get a waiver for 3 acres.
Yeah, it's a it's
Right.
a
You're-
conversion exemption.
You're probably not going to have an operation bigger than 3 acres that's going
Right.
to need a conversion permit.
That's what I mean. You get the exemption, which still requires a forester to come and do, there's some review. Yeah. you come
Does
and
it,
look
does
at
it
that.
trigger CEQA on less than 3 acres?
Heidi?
Well, the sequel will be triggered if it requires a use permit.
Yeah, you mean we'll have to do CEQA? You mean
We will have to do
will
CEQA anyway.
the Board of Forestry have to do CEQA?
On a 3-acre timber conversion, I think if there's no discretionary permit, I think it is exempt. Also, CAL FIRE has released information, at least a note to Humboldt County regarding, how they interact with folks who are doing cannabis operations. And obviously, we need to familiarize ourselves with those regulations as well.
But the reason, there's definitely TPZ property that should be rezoned. It's not productive in timber. It's never going to yield any taxes to the county ever. It's just sitting there. They don't even generate tax bills for a lot of them because they're not worth anything on the tax roll. And so those properties make sense to rezone into something that can be used for a productive purpose and generate some tax revenue. And there's other properties that are so prime for timber that they're not appropriate for rezoning. And I think that would come up with the, in the process when you try to apply to rezone a prime piece of timberland. I don't know, unless you're doing it for a different purpose, I don't know how that works. Like if you have a prime piece of TBZ and you want to rezone it, you don't say why necessarily, you just want to rezone it. I don't know how that works. Like like you said, the board gets to vote on it, 4/5 vote to approve it, so they can stop it there. I don't know if that makes a difference. The things that the stated purpose of what you're doing, you do one thing and then you use it for another purpose later on. I don't know if that matters.
That's something we can look at. You know, what kind of rationale the board can use to not vote and not be abusing discretion. But once you rezone it, if people then turn around and don't do what they say they're going to do, what are you going to do?
Right. Well, if they don't need much of a reason, I mean, I don't know. I'm getting into an area that I don't know much about here, so I don't really know the board's inclination in the past. I don't know if there's been a lot of attempts to rezone TPZ property. Recently, Green Diamond did some for subdivision, but I don't know if they get a lot of individuals trying to do that. I don't really know.
No, it's not very common unless there's, you know, obviously there's a lot of restrictions on what you can and can't do with TPZ zone land, which obviously by rezoning it, it opens up for other opportunities. In the case of the recent applications that we've received from Green Diamond, they have been timberland holdings that have been adjacent to, you know, rural residential develop, et cetera. So it really fit to look at it then for future residential development. So that was their intended use. I know we had one up on South Fork Road that removed it from TPZ because they wanted to expand the variety of uses that they had going on. It was a ranch. But generally, yeah, an intended use would obviously need to be specified.
All right.
I would think that, you know, if we required a rezone of TPZ and it requires a 4/5 vote and all that, and this is the area we're trying to get them, I can understand trying to get a little extra tax revenue, but you know, changing politics of the board could really make it hard for, you know, in the future can make it hard for somebody who'd set up operations up there to, you know, I could see it be a sweat and bullets kind of thing, whether you're going to, you know, bringing that in front. And then what is it, the Board of Forestry would have to go in front of it as well, to rezone TPZ?
Anything over 3 acres, I believe, requires a timberland conversion permit from the Board of Forestry. And that entails a full CEQA review.
Because like when you rezone, you're allowed to cut the trees down, so you gotta have it.
Well, I think one thing that Robert's getting at is how the order of operations in our process. We're going to make people get a use permit not knowing whether the board's going to rezone their property. Do you have to show up with rezoned property to apply for your use permit? I don't know. I haven't thought about that before. But we don't want to make it so hard that nobody gets one.
Yeah, I would say in the case of TPZ, it should be rezoned first. That probably should, or maybe an application can go concurrently, but it doesn't get granted until the rezone takes place. I can see that. I'm pretty familiar with the TPZ properties that would be suitable for that. There aren't a lot of them. So, yeah, maybe too bad for people who want to develop one. It might cost a little bit more, but I think that's fine.
Something that I think we thought about a long time ago, you know, a year ago. Humboldt has, or had, I haven't been keeping up with Humboldt, but they had their artisanal kind of label that required you to live on the property with the like 3,000 square feet or whatever they were allowing. And I think we had kicked around the idea of requiring that here for all cultivation. or maybe just all cultivation in TPZ or something, I don't know, or on timberland. I'm not totally sure that there's necessarily a nexus there, but, you know, it's a consideration. What is the character of the grow going to be? And is it going to be, you know, related, are we going to create an avenue to do some Delnor branding or something like that, artisanal, et cetera?
I like that idea. Public comment.
Yeah, I was Andrea Davis. I think that kind of framing it around high quality vineyards and their style of agriculture. I think a lot of high quality vineyards, they're using biodynamic agriculture as a way of farming. And there are certifications for biodynamic farming that possibly the county ag could implement somehow. So that's all I have to say. It would probably raise the level of quality, and that's all.
Thank you.
So I've got the Humboldt artisanal branding part of the ordinance in front of me, and it limits the cultivation area to 3,000 square feet or less. It's operated by a county permit and state license holder who resides on the same parcel as the cultivation site. It's grown exclusively in natural light and meets organic certification standards or the substantial equivalent.
I think that definitely steers the style and the nature of the operation in the right direction.
And so that could include a greenhouse, but no supplemental light sources, right?
Right.
Exactly lend itself for maintained production. You would have to be looking elsewhere. Am I not
Yeah.
correct to maintain your production?
Yeah,
If that's the case?
There's some, yeah, I don't know how they define that, you know, and at what times, you know. I don't know if they're talking about just for the flower production, you're not using lights. If you have like in a cultivation plan, for example, you submit to the state, you have your cultivation area, your production area, that's your square footage you pay for your permit. And then you get like what would you call it, a nursery area, so to speak, a non-production area for your vegetative plants, your nursery workspace. And that's not limited in size by the state. And it's not defined in any way. It doesn't talk about light levels or any of that.
Yeah, just so everybody's aware, to be able to maintain production year-round per se, or just yearly, and keep your own plants contingent to your facility, you would need supplemental lighting.
Sure.
You would need to be able to maintain your plants in a vegetative state, and the cannabis plants require it,
So
particular
now-
day length to maintain vegetative
That's right.
states, and hence the reasons why cottage growing or just growing in general, a lot of people like to maintain their own varieties of cannabis that they've cultivated themselves, and so they need either a small indoor facility and or a supplemental lighted, essentially greenhouse situation to maintain that. Otherwise, you're having to continually look yearly at another person's production and bring in the plants every year.
Yeah, it's
somewhere
not
else.
feasible for a lot of business models. Some business models are geared around just that, and then others that wouldn't function at all. So with Humboldt's ordinance, artisanal brand, I don't know when they say no artificial light, I don't know if they're referring specifically to the production area that you're permitting from the state.
I think it's exclusively for the cultivation area.
Okay.
It says grown exclusively with natural light. So I would assume they mean the application to the cultivation area of 3,000 square feet or less. I can
Right,
clarify that with
right.
the
So
planning
then-
department.
So then if you had genetics, you're overwintering, or in the spring, you could still use lights in your greenhouse theoretically for that if it's separate from the production area. Yeah, definitely an assumption. I don't know their intention, Humboldt's
We
intention
can clarify
there.
that with the Humboldt County
Sure.
Planning Department, which
Sure.
is the author of the regulations.
So if we did something like that, I would just like to see a clarification that doesn't exclude the ability to, you know, operate year-round, which does require lights.
I think from an invasive species control standpoint, having people maintain their own varieties is desirable. You don't have people bringing in plants from out of the areas that could have pathogens or pests on them. So we should definitely, as a group,
That's a
encourage
huge
that.
problem in the cannabis industry, weird exotic pests that are devastating.
Is that something that you're going to be tasked with inspecting? Like plants coming in from out of county?
Yeah, if plants come in from out of a county and there's a quarantine that applies to them, they would need to have them inspected by us. Of course, if people meet on the back of flatbed trucks somewhere in the boonies and exchange plants or something, we're not going to know about it most likely.
I'm wondering, and I don't have a clue necessarily, but are there any county restrictions within the state of California? Because I know this happens when you're talking about shipments that come from out of state. There's all different states with all different things, and particularly out of countries. But
There are
internal to the state of California, there's different.
There are dozens of state internal quarantines.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
that used to be my specialty in my last county.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. So there's, and I don't know how the shipments would all happen by county by county. I'm assuming it's going to happen through nursery licenses, and all of that stuff is going to be maintained through that, even though it's not an agricultural commodity.
So one of the questions too would be soil and soil contaminants and the importation of soils and the movement of soils, because that also contains pests and pathogens. And I think that's something, especially given our timber industry and our other agricultural products, we need to protect as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of trucking and importing of soils and organic materials for that, for sure, a lot more so than standard agriculture, I think.
And there's a number of quarantines where soil is a regulated commodity in them. So all sorts of different plant products can be under a quarantine.
Yeah, and then talking about nurseries, that's where here, the ag land is prime for nurseries. That's what I see. If there was a farm that had facilities and they're appropriately positioned, appropriately located, nursery operation would make sense on the coast. Nursery production, it's a big business in other counties, and definitely for the time being, if there was going to be licensed cultivation here, they'd be relying on nurseries out of county to provide the stock, and then they would presumably go through a quarantine, I guess. I don't know how that would work right now. I didn't see anything in any of these regulations that talks about county to county transfer of plants. And I don't know, how would the ag department address that?
Sure. So, for example, if you want to bring something from Southern California where there's a glassy wing sharpshooter quarantine, so some landscape ornamentals, you would get a certificate from the county down there to transport those, and then that county would notify the ag department here directly. And this happens all the time. We're doing an inspection on one of those today, in fact. So, and then that way we know, they fax it to us or whatever, we know for sure the shipment's coming, where it's supposed to go and all that. And if the people don't contact us for an inspection when it arrives, we can contact them.
Okay. And so what about Humboldt, Trinity, and Mendocino? There's licensed nurseries there. Are there quarantine things with those counties?
Sure is. Sudden oak death, that's a big concern, and they've got that all over in Humboldt and Mendocino counties.
Okay. Good to know.
So, Justin, a quarantine would be set by something less than a statute, right? I mean, it's a little more flexible. There's not a law that says there's a sudden oak quarantine in Mendocino, right? There's some sort of a CDFA resolution or...
Correct.
So then probably that would be what would decide if, a nursery or transportation of cannabis plants is going to be quarantined, right?
Correct.
That's what we'd expect. So since there's nobody licensed to purchase them yet, I guess that's why we haven't dealt with it. But it'd be curious to see if it is happening between licensees in other counties where it is legal.
I'm sure it is.
Well, I believe they're doing it just for public people in Brookings right now. I drive through town and see clones for sale, so you can go buy a clone in Brookings and bring it to Del Norte.
Yeah, that's a personal side of things, though, I think, yeah.
Not legally,
It
though.
is legal, it is illegal, yeah.
And you're technically, when you drove through the inspection station, you would have to leave it behind.
I didn't say I did it, I saw a sign.
But so back to the other counties with the sudden oak death thing. And so my understanding, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong because I'm not the expert you are, there's a setup of requirements that then production needs to meet to be quote unquote past that, for example, like soilless media and a certain varieties, and so forth and so on. And when those are all met, that county issues the okay for that product to move, right? And so then would you actually inspect that when it came to this county, let's say? So say it comes out of Humboldt County or Trinity County where it has a SOD quarantine, and it came to this county, would you actually inspect it, or would you just certify that the requirements were met paper-wise?
We would certainly try to inspect it. I mean, it's going to depend on how many of these shipments there are. There are times of the year where we can't inspect everything that comes in. Now, cannabis is not a sudden oak death host, but the soil, you know, so especially if somebody's digging up native soil or commingling it, or has the plants out where, say, bay trees are overhanging them or nearby, and the pathogens getting into these potted plants, and then you bring them into the county, that's I have a lot of concern about that. So
the ag department and now their local county certifying that where their soil comes from, for example, the constituents within it, like bark, for example.
Right. Yeah, they would probably end up getting a compliance agreement, you know, and then have annual testing, all that sort of stuff.
I guess what I'm trying to also get at is most of that actually happens on the other county's side, right? The ag inspector in your position there is doing the physical inspections on that nursery and giving them their certifications and basically sending, let's say, you or your department certification saying this nursery complies and their product is compliant.
Correct, yes.
And you're just kind of like the last step in that, but most of it's done there, not here.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
If it was happening here and we were shipping it out, then it would be different. It would be you and your department looking at physically what's happening here.
Right, although since we don't have sudden oak death here in Del Norte County at this point, we wouldn't have to be doing all that certification, but we probably will have it here eventually. Unfortunately, we're surrounded by it at this point.
To be an inevitable situation, and like you say, cannabis at this point isn't a host of something like that, and I don't know if any cannabis is determined to be a host of any exactly fungicidal or any other pathogens. For example, like rhododendrons are hosts, and therefore, state of California, if you grow them in any situation, even in this county, it becomes nearly impossible to get them out of the state.
Cannabis is definitely host to many dangerous and difficult to get rid of pathogens, funguses, molds, small bugs.
Whether or not cannabis is actually a host to sudden oak death?
Well, so that's where it gets interesting.
I don't think it's been done.
No, not really.
And given the breadth of hosts that Phytophthora mimorum infests, I would be surprised if it wasn't susceptible to it.
I agree with you on that.
At least as a host.
Yeah, legally at this point, it's not on the list, so it's not, the plant itself isn't regulated. It's more the soil that is at this point, but yeah, that could certainly change.
There's integrated pest management through the University of California. They would probably be a good resource to identify common pests among cannabis as the government starts to deal with it.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're a great resource. And, you know, growers, even right today, can bring pests to our department and get them identified. CDFA a while back lifted the ban on county ag commissioner departments taking those types of samples. So we can identify those things for people right now and help prevent them from spreading.
Yeah, take advantage of the resource. I brought a sample to the ag department and they identified an aphid for me. So. Yeah, let's wrap it up. Shall we close it? Yes, ma'am. Any other public comment or staff or members? All right. I can't remember if we had set the next meeting date solidly or it was just tentatively. I'd like to stick with the 2-week schedule if we can. I don't know if we need to check with Kylie for the board schedule. But if it's available, then 2 weeks from today, Wednesday. I don't have the day on the calendar in front of me. And we can just continue the cultivation discussion, indoor versus outdoor, or indoor and outdoor.
It might be helpful to start agendizing sub-parts of cultivation.
Okay.
And
What would you recommend, maybe, like indoor, outdoor?
I think indoor you could get done. I think indoor you could get done a lot faster.
Okay.
As far as coming to a conclusion than what recommend. Outdoors where it's going to be a lot more involved.
Okay, so make indoors separate item from outdoor, and then maybe underneath outdoor, some different categories. Right.
yeah, we could have whole conversations about light, about water, about pesticides, about, we should probably do a whole conversation about what the state's already regulating. So we know either what we see as holes or what would be duplicative or what we think is likely to be ignored by the state, even though there's laws on the subject.
Okay.
You know, what things we could just simply say, you know, it's incorporated by reference that you have to obey all water laws, and then we could enforce them, and, you know, have a whole conversation about a fee schedule. There's an initiative on the ballot. Well, actually, I need to check and see if it made it on the ballot. I think I can check today, actually. That would make life really, really hard to set fees. Like really, really hard.
Like call them turning them into taxes.
Yeah, basically, it would be considered a tax unless we could prove very carefully the benefit to the permit applicant. And so you can't just basically pool money to save for enforcement because it has to be spent on that applicant.
I gotcha.
It makes life just kind of unworkable. We should just quit at that point. So hopefully, you know, hopefully that doesn't pass. But that's a conversation to have later at the end.
Well, I'll help you, Joel, to learn about how the fee can help me personally. Okay, excellent. July 11th. That's when we'll meet next here, Wednesday, July 11th, 10 a.m. And we'll talk about indoor cultivation, and outdoor cultivation. We'll go over state regulations, learn a little bit more about what's new, and talk about costs and fees. That should be enough. And any other thing we want to talk about that comes up will be fair game too. All right, thanks everybody for coming. Meeting adjourned.